right. Alright, so I've been posting a lot of pictures of food I've made on Facebook, and so I figured that today I'd actually give you something useful, which is one of my favorite things to make, which is Irish soda bread. So that's what I'm going to go over today. Irish soda bread's incredibly quick to make, incredibly simple. Many of you have probably mentioned it too, or I've ranted about it, or I've given you a loaf of it, and so I figured I would just give a quick tutorial on that. So to make Irish soda bread, we're really going to need, ingredient-wise, we'll need 4 things. You'll need flour, we'll need buttermilk, or spoiled regular milk. I wouldn't really say spoiled, but you can take just your regular whole milk and add some acid in, so be that lemon juice or vinegar, or just something that's an acid, because that's kind of the point of the buttermilk, is it's going to react with the namesake of the bread, the baking soda, and that's going to be what produces the rise in the bread. And so to cook it in, I like to use a cast iron pan. That's really my favorite thing to use. It's the cooking utensil that I've gotten the most positive results out of, and so that's just what I would recommend. You can just use like a baking stone or even just a pot. You can just take a pot and put it in the oven and that, but I've always just had the best results out of the cast iron. So to begin, I already made a loaf earlier on, which is why this is already dirty. We're going to take about 4 cups all purpose. You could use pastry flour, because you don't want to use bread flour for this, because soda bread works better with lower gluten, just because of how the bread is, and so it's better to use all-purpose than bread. Obviously, you can use bread. I've used bread for it. It's just more likely to kind of explode, I suppose, in the oven, and not explode in a violent way. Just in the outer crust will harden up, and the inside will kind of press it, and it'll end up breaking out into segments, kind of. Alright, so that's our flour done. Let's get our other 2 dry ingredients, which is going to be the baking soda. It's going to be about half a tablespoon of each. Baking soda can kind of clump up, so it's nice to break those up before you mix in the buttermilk, but I don't think it's actually matters that much. And then we're going to use some salt. That's not really a required ingredient, but it's going to taste good. You can add things like sugar, but that's not really a traditional ingredient, and so I don't really use it, because also it's just sugar. It's gonna make it taste slightly sweet. Nice. All right, so we've gotten all the dry ingredients nice mixed up. I'll make a little whole thing in the center for the buttermilk, and then we're gonna put in really about 2 cups. It depends. It changes every time, or changes really for everybody. The recipes I've found in the past have been like, oh, put in 1 3/4, but that is never enough for me, and so I always just put in 2 cups, and then sometimes I even have to add more. I'll probably have to add more to this recipe. I don't think I put in quite 2 cups either. I hate the feeling of this. This really doesn't feel good to me, but it's really the best way to do it. I've tried using spatulas. I've tried really just doing a lot of anything other than sticking my hand in here and mixing it up by hand, because I hate the feeling of just this type of dough stuck to your fingers. It's really nasty, but sometimes you gotta live with stuff, so it's worth it in the end, I guess. We're just going to keep on mixing it. It's important to not knead this. You might be very tempted to just be like, oh, we'll just do this like regular bread, and you have a KitchenAid or something that you're just going to stick it in and do it that way, but you do not want to knead this. If you knead it, it will be guaranteed to be very tough, and the crust will be stone-like. It'll be really, really hard. And it will probably explode in the oven. Again, I don't mean violently explode. I mean, you'll have one of the sections will push out and break the crust, which isn't really desirable in the I don't know what I was saying. All right, anyway. This is pretty good. It needs a little bit more buttermilk. Yeah. Yeah. I don't like that. So I'm just gonna add a bit of buttermilk into this. And that'll act kind of as a glue, because you can see that most of this is pretty integrated, pretty mixed up already. It just needs a bit more to kind of get the rest of it in. And actually it looks like it's a bit dry in the bottom, so I might need even more. Like I said, you kind of just add it as you go along. And really the most important part here is to just get everything stuck together. You don't want it super wet. You don't want it super dry. You just want everything to kind of hold together. And this is actually a pretty forgiving dough. It will generally work even if it is super wet or even if it is super dry. In fact, a super wet dough can be really nice. It's just a bit harder to handle, not quite as easy as it is regularly, which is why I would just recommend trying to aim for somewhere in the middle, because that's kind of why we're eating soda bread, is because it's so cheap and easy, and it does taste good. But obviously there is breads that do taste better than soda bread, and it's not for everyone. But hey, give it a try. If you don't like it, you suck. Okay, so this needs a tiny bit more, and then it'll be good, and it'll be fine. Apologize if the audio in here is bad, or if my camera work isn't fantastic. It's kind of a one-man show, and my kitchen is 5 feet by 7 feet. It's very, very small, and very little room for anything that's going to absorb any kind of sound. So this is looking good, actually. So let's just... Yeah, that's good. Alright, so you want to knead it a tiny bit. If you don't knead it at all, it will fall apart. But you really, literally only want to knead it like 2 or 3 times, and that's good. Like, I would say that this is good. So we're just gonna throw that down there. And we'll need a bit more flour on that. A tiny bit of flour. Just sprinkle this there. And I like to kind of press in the bottom to help build up the shape, because, we're not kneading it at all. And so that's probably good. Look at the bottom. I'll put a bit more flour there just to make sure it doesn't stick to the pan. That is a bit of a risk sometimes, but that's because the pan is going to be dirty. Normally it won't stick. If you're really afraid it's going to stick, you can use something like yellow cornmeal, or even any kind of just coarser grain like this, or ground grain. You can use that. And by the way, pro tip, that's the same thing you use when cooking pizza a lot of the time, is you can put some cornmeal on it if you find that your pizza's sticking to the peel. Alright, so we're basically good to go. I've had the oven preheating at about 400. My oven is stupid and doesn't stick where you want it to be, and so it's really just like, it's somewhere around 400 is where you want this to be. And then I'm gonna put it in the pan, and then of course, as is tradition, then you slice a cross in the top. This is for 2 things. 1, it of course keeps the demons away, and 2, it kind of allows it to open up and cook a bit in the inside. And this actually matters. How deep you cut ends up defining how long you should bake it, and the temp, and really the end structure of the bread. Because if you cut a deep slice in here, then it will open up much bigger, and the middle will be much more exposed to the heat of the oven, and it will cook quicker. While if you put a very light slice in, then it will hold its shape, and it will kind of stay in this kind of taller shape, but you'll have to cook it at a lower temperature and for longer, or else the outer crust will burn. I'm going to go for a bit of a deeper cut, just because I prefer to, just my oven burns things, and so I prefer to keep it as safe as possible with my cooking. And so I just like it to open up and let the inside cook, so I don't end up with raw soda bread, which happened like 3 or 4 times when I first moved in here, before I learned the evils of this demonic oven. That's why I really put the cross on the top of it. Alright, so this is going to cook in the oven really for about 40 minutes. It doesn't really matter. Like, you kind of get it sense for when it comes out. But you'll be able to tell. It's not really a set time because again it depends on your oven. I'm going to put this in the oven, and then when it comes out, then you're going to wrap it up in a towel and let it sit for about 10 minutes or so. I always love to cut into it right away, but you don't want to do that because that will cause it to go gummy. I've done that a great many times too. And you come back later and it's just like, oh man, I messed it up, messed up the texture. And so I would really let this sit for 10 minutes before you cut it open. My hands are a bit of a mess, so it's going to be hard. But to tell that it's done, then you can kind of just, like, it needs to sound hollow. Like, that's how you can tell. You pull it out of the oven and you're afraid that it's raw, well, just give it a couple taps. If it sounds hollow, the center isn't raw. So that's really it. I'm just going to put the new one that I just made in the oven, really 45 minutes at about 400 degrees. It'll really look like this. That's where you want to pull out. This one went a little bit much. As you can see, the tips are a bit dark, but that is really it. If anybody has any questions about it, let me know, and we can. I'll answer. All right, my brain isn't working. I've been self-quarantined for like 2 months at this point, but it's fine. All right.